CD, aren't you gonna do a video on Moon Girl? I already did. No, the trans episode that got banned and then leaked. Why? Because we want to hear your take. But you guys always complain about my take, because I'm always more critically discerning than the cheerleading squad. CD, you're a trans YouTuber, now bark for my amusement. Okay, so about a year ago, was it a year ago? 2 years ago? Wait, then how long ago were... Oh fuck, time is meaningless. Anyway, 2 years ago I did a first impressions on Moon Girl, which was a show I had been looking forward to for a while, only to sour on it when one of the executive producers claimed on Twitfastagram that they intended to go serialized with it. I kept watching for a little while, only to see that the season 1 finale seemed to be going in the direction of suffering as plot with Lunella, and just kind of fell off and went to do something else. That's something being marathoning the entire Pokemon series and pulling apart an incestuous Harry Potter fanfic, apparently. I hadn't really done a lot of work with cartoons since, outside of a few videos covering ideas and concepts rather than specific works of animation, and revisiting The Legend of Korra. So it was to my surprise when people kicked my door in during late 2024 asking about a supposed banned episode of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur that featured a trans character. Now, I'm admittedly very skeptical when someone runs up and tells me a cartoon features a trans character, because that could mean anything from a bit character to an outright villain. And even then, I can't be certain of the actual quality on that fact alone. I used to say that the minimum standard for LGBT rep was main characters whose relationship to their orientation or gender was a primary element of the plot. And then She-Ra came out and, well, I did say being good was extra credit, so I guess you get a passing grade. Begrudgingly. But funnily enough, She-Ra put a lot of things in perspective. I mean, if Catradora can get headlines lavishing it in praise, can I really keep playing by the old rules? Eventually you have to accept that the tides are moving the other way, or you just end up looking like a vindictive crackpot. Kurt Hummel, all is forgiven. I'm sorry I was ever mean to you. So fuck it, give me your worst, Moon Girl. And you pulled this from airing? This was perfect, you fuck! So the episode The Gatekeeper is, and I'm not exaggerating here, literally everything I've ever wanted out of trans rep. I have no notes. Well, I have a lot of notes. Stuff like, no, I'm not crying, someone's cutting onions, and I might actually finish watching Moon Girl again after doing this video because my earlier concerns about it have been abated entirely. This episode is actually extremely dense and covering a plot that is on the surface about trans athletes, but in reality is about two other things just underneath. It covers issues that are not only topical, but deeply resonant to any trans femme who, for one reason or another, finds themselves the object of attention from people who would do them harm, and the anxiety that creates about how their support systems are softly implied to be conditional. It's an episode that walks in, says everything it needs to say, sticks every landing with grace and flair, and then walks out saying, top that. It is to trans rep in children's animation what Lumity was to gay rep in children's animation, taking a bar that had been on the floor and throwing it into the ceiling and telling everyone to get on its level. Or at least it would have been had it not been pulled from airing, and subtly validating every single counter criticism about how LGBT rep is handled in cartoons, where any complaint you may have is immediately and reflexively blamed on censorship. The episode opens with the volleyball team getting ready for a game against a rival school, with new but also not character Brooklyn as the team captain. As they meet the opposing team, their coach looks like someone took Principal Folsom's head and stuck her on Odalia Blight's body and gave her J.K. Rowling's personality. Actually, no, that's unfair. Let's not be mean. J.K. Rowling is a lot more unhinged than this. This is Coach Greer. As in Germaine Greer, very clever. While friendly at first, because they always seem friendly at first, Greer turns out to be an extreme lawful neutral rules lawyer, as upon discovering that Brooklyn is trans by overhearing her and Ty discussing the dark days of pre-transition, she immediately starts bitching to the coach about it being against the rules for a trans girl to play. Not that she'd ever say that specifically, she keeps trying to allude to it like a drama YouTuber trying to talk around their own fascism.
Your team captain used to play on a boys' team. Boys team.
But the coach is having none of it because the rules specifically say that Brooklyn can play. Unfortunately, said coach is immediately injured in a fall and has to be taken off the court. So Greer starts trying to rules lawyer them into a forfeit since they lack a coach. Psych! Brooklyn turns out to be a player coach because the rules allow that, and Brooklyn was valedictorian of the Harvard School of Rules Lawyering. Well, Lunella offers first, but Brooklyn doesn't want to let the water girl carry that kind of burden. Of course, a through line for the episode is Brooklyn is aware that she is the reason Greer is trying to argue a forfeit, and so takes the burden of countering it on herself. Why? Well, we're gonna get into that. Later in the locker room, Brooklyn and the rest of the team are grousing about Greer's obvious transphobia, with Ty in particular expressing some choice sentiments over this, and let's be nice here, fucking cow. Greer tries to argue with Brooklyn specifically that she should drop out to make things fair. The rules actually aren't on her side, so she starts pissing and moaning about fairness. It was fairness at first, but then when the coach was injured, she pivoted, and now she's back onto this. Transphobes always stick on fairness as an excuse to exclude trans women from women's sports, drawing on outdated and obsolete and misogynistic ideas that testosterone promotes muscle growth and therefore gives trans women an unfair advantage over cis women. Of course, here in reality, it doesn't affect muscle growth to that significant of a degree, and body standards standards are more to explain why men tend to go for builds like a brick shithouse and women tend to bulk up in a more lean and tone fashion. Furthermore, sports requires a lot more of a person than sheer muscle mass, coordination, agility, cardiovascular endurance, and of course strategy in the case of team sports. But we all know this. Anyone who's ever had a girl bully in school knows this. Anyone who's ever had a sister tower over them like an ominous spire of impending misery knows this. But what TERFs, and the athletes who also bitch about being outplayed by trans women, are doing is arguing that their defeat isn't down to skill, but some nebulous, unfair advantage. It's the same shit that crybabies always say when they lose. And Greer herself is effectively poisoning the well to argue that if her team loses, well, then it just wasn't fair. Later in the episode, it's none too subtly implied that she does this everywhere because the kind of person who dips into straight-up misogyny to argue why they lost certainly isn't going to be a good sport about losing for any other reason. I mean, for fuck's sake, the International Chess Federation banned trans women from playing in women's chess out of a perceived unfair advantage. Really sit back and think about what you're saying there. Furthermore, why is chess gender segregated in the first fucking place? Anyway, Brooklyn is completely unwilling to cede ground, so Greer, locks them into a PG saw trap using a magical key that turns whatever room you locked into a pocket dimension, with a little hollow of her claiming that to get out, they must play by her rules and play fair. So they start hunting down the keys to unlock the many locked door. Girls, she said her rules. Think about that for a minute. You'll get it there eventually. While the girls are trying to escape from the saw trap, Greer locked them in there specifically to make them unable to attend the actual game and be disqualified, going right back to rules lawyering. And Casey stalls for time by rules lawyering right back.
But, according to clause, one of those in the volleyball constitution, don't you need to respect the rules and traditions of the home court?
Damn, Greer, I think you might have to go back and retake your rules bar exam. Turns out that, to nobody's surprise, the door opens to a copy of the locker room, resetting and locking them back in. Faced with yet another roadblock in a life that has no doubt been nothing but roadblocks, Brooklyn finally breaks down and then lets all her frustrations out.
I'm trans. My very existence breaks Greer's rules. We'll never escape. This is all my fault.
Brooke is exhausted with the sheer amount of roadblocks that a transphobic society tries to put in her way, which is the whole point. The reason TERFs make a battleground of public bathrooms, for example, isn't any perception of safety. It has never once been illegal to go into the wrong bathroom, and the crimes you're trying to prevent were already illegal in the first place. But the whole point is that public restrooms are an extremely crucial element of being able to exist in public. And if you can't use them, you don't have any option but to just stay home. And that's the point. Excluding trans people, predominantly trans women, from being able to use the bathroom, take part in sports, take part in things that aren't sports, harassing them in public, forcibly outing them to their parents, denying them the ability to be themselves at work or at school, and slandering them to their friends and community, is all done with the express purpose of making it next to impossible to exist in society at all. To isolate them so completely and utterly, either so your own abuse of individual trans women will be more effective at getting them to commit suicide, or to make people look the other way when the state moves on to genocide. This is literally stage 4 on the 10 stages of genocide. For those of you watching at home, the US government is currently on stage 7. This is something that has been affecting Brooklyn and is the reason she keeps everything bottled up, because she is the target of Greer's ire, and as a result she feels uniquely responsible. And she's hesitant to trust her friends with this because she's afraid they'll come to the same conclusion, that it's just not worth affecting the entire team when they could just get out of this by jettisoning one member. Trans women are so uncommon that for a lot of these smaller groups, it's just less of a hassle to stop talking to a trans girl than it is to take the social risk of sticking up for her. Brooklyn's anxieties speak to the anxieties a lot of trans women have, that their presence is always uniquely conditional, that their friends, families, and social circles' support of them has limits, and we live in fear of what those limits actually are. Trans girls are so heavily vilified and slandered and lied about. Lying about trans women is a financially viable career for a certain kind of subhuman rodent. When individual trans women are targeted by hate groups, the first thing those hate groups do is target their job, their family, their friends, trying to isolate them from those people. Their experiences of harassment, bullying, and abuse will be flipped around and they will be painted as the perpetrator in all of them. Their lives will be picked clean, looking for anything that could be twisted into something incriminating. It is socially acceptable to abuse trans women to a degree that would be considered sociopathic if it were done to anyone else. And if that abuse does step over a proverbial line, even in that situation, it's just ignored. And in that environment, it is extremely easy to be afraid that your friends, the people who love you, will not show you unconditional support because, well, look, the rest of them are also locked in there, with the intended effect by Greer being that they will kick Brooklyn off the team. That's what Greer means by play by my rules. She's not targeting Brooklyn with this, she's targeting the others, and Brooklyn knows this. which is why she puts so much effort into being the one to get them out. She's deadlocked in always feeling like she has to prove her value to the people around her. Of course, the solution is obvious, and here we get to probably the most masterfully executed metaphor I've ever seen in a cartoon. The game is rigged. The rules are made so that Greer always wins. The framework of cis society is designed the same way, actively punishing those who step outside of gender norms. There's no way for a trans person to win in that system. So what do they do instead?
And that just gets me just really so angry. Ah!
No, I think you're onto something. I'm trying to play by the rules, but when the game is rigged, that doesn't work.
We have to break through this whole system.
Fucking brilliant. Oh god, that's so good. Even framing it as tech, as a computer system, means they can use the direct language in a very sly fashion. Absolutely amazing. It also hits at an additional element of real life. Without the system locking everyone in place, Greer doesn't have any power to do anything. It's easy to get wrapped up in arguing with individual bigots, but it's the systems and laws and frameworks of our very society that give them any power in the first place. Systemic oppression is the thing that must be broken down. Without that systemic oppression in place, Greer's opinions just don't matter. And once they irreparably damage the inner workings of the holodeck, Greer is left without any recourse. The team comes back and she fucking loses. Even her own team turns against her, tired of her constant manipulations to get them to victory without actually playing the game, reflecting other real-life athletes who are also tired of sore losers making their losses into some ideological battleground. And the episode ends with them finally playing. You don't get to see the outcome of the game because the whole point of it, and the trans sports debate in particular, isn't about the outcome of a sport, it's about excluding trans people from one of the many things that make life worth living. This is fucking amazing. You might expect me to have some kind of caveat or something that's hanging off of it that I have to bring up, but no, there's none. No notes. They don't even have Greer misgender Brooklyn because that's just a level of unpleasant that would detract from the episode. It's just a damn good episode that simultaneously hits many different beats than just the topical trans athlete debate. You know what? I need to stop calling it a debate. The trans athlete moral panic. That's what it is. It covers trans issues both on the political and the emotional and grazes by issues of how trans people are vilified to the point they can't even completely trust their own support systems. It is, without question, the single best coverage of trans issues and a trans character in a children's cartoon. And it's nice to see that my early worries about where the show was headed didn't come true. And so now we get to it being pulled from the air. Now bear with me, I'm going somewhere with this. I can actually see why it was pulled. Disney has always been a politically skittish company, and their brand has always been forward, but not too forward, to appeal to both young people and their parents expected to actually spend money. And Gatekeeper is a no-holds-barred, direct political reference, unapologetically pro-trans episode. This is completely out of left field for anything published by Disney. Hell, it's completely out of left field for any of these other studios. This is like if the Liberal Party started quoting the Communist Manifesto. Reports indicated that Disney held off on it because they wanted to observe the political climate, and with spray tan Mengele and tech bro Hitler getting into power on a popular vote of all things, pulled back because of the trans themes. That sounds like exactly what Disney would do, as like most corpos, they have their feet firmly nailed to the Overton window, and so when it shifts, they shift with it. Of course, once it was leaked and caught attention from people, Disney backpedaled and claimed that they made the decision to hold off on it a year ago and that it was simply on hold. And honestly,
Sure, Jan.
this is exactly the kind of PR backpedaling that would be expected immediately after being revealed you'd scrapped an episode. And if you had done it a year prior, why are people only talking about it now? Furthermore, in February, Disney was one of the many companies that it was revealed to have been scaling back diversity programs to investors. Admittedly, investors are a fickle bunch and likely panicked that diversity wasn't a profitable venture because of Trump's election. 90% of the stock market is just idiots in business suits chasing every trend possible and panicking when it doesn't lead to infinite money and then stamping their feet at the people they gamble their money on. But even if you don't factor that in, I'm not surprised. Capitalism and the companies that fuel it aren't going to create societal change. They don't create anything. They're a coasting leech pandering to whatever they think is the dominant group at any given region. That does make them useful for measuring exactly where the Overton window is, but that is all they're useful for. At the end of the day, the only thing any corporation cares about is keeping their taxes low, keeping unions from having too much power, and keeping regulations from getting in their way. Other than that, they never do anything beside give the people what they want, and the impression the election had given was that diversity and inclusion is over, so they shrugged their shoulders and shifted. And since trans people are a primary target of this new generation of Nazis, right alongside Palestinians and the mentally ill, they're the first on the chopping block when companies decide to pivot. Capitalism being involved in the creation of art was always an adversary adversarial relationship because art is about speaking from the soul, and business executives don't have a soul. The people responsible for making art aren't the ones running the companies. In the same way that tech companies aren't run by engineers, they're run by narcissistic morons whose only skill is having a rich daddy. This goes everywhere, not just art. You can't trust on the systems in power to have your back when things get difficult. You can only trust on your own community. You know, I've been ruminating on this for a while, and frankly, I don't see any better place to do this. Over the last few years, I've said more than a few unkind and unfair things about a number of my fellow trans femmes. Some of it criticism taken to an emotional extreme that was just straight up over the line, others reflective spitting back at people who decided to punch down at me as well. I'd like to retract all of it. I don't care if people don't like me specifically. I'm not going to take part in this circular firing squad anymore. It gets us nowhere and it only helps the people who want us dead. So to that end, I'd like to apologize for everything I've ever said about Natalie Wynn, Jessica Ruthier, Nate Stevenson, Patricia Taxon, Jesse Earl, Rebecca Sugar, and Abigail Thorne. Transphobes want trans people fighting each other and ostracizing each other in the name of optics. They want us constantly trying to play by the rules of a rigged game. And I'm not going to do it anymore. I will not be part of the vilification of any trans person for any made-up reason anymore. I'm CD Call. Thanks for watching.